The clock stopped 10 years ago, the moment the horse vanished into the glare of the eastern horizon. For a father living at the ragged edge of civilization, the journey was supposed to be simple, necessary supplies, back by dusk. But the dusk brought nothing but silence. Now, every sunrise finds him standing guard over an empty, unforgiving track of gravel. He measures his existence not by days, but by the silent, accumulating miles of that road. He knows the world has written his son off. A decade of crushing weight cannot erase the burning clarity in his heart. He is coming home. My name is Elias Vance, 72. I often forget that fact. Though the sun-scorched skin stretched taut across the bones of my face, and the deep-set blue eyes that sting from perpetual squinting confirm the number without fail. 72 years, measured out in heat and dust, but only the last 10 have truly counted. Those 10 years are a solid, agonizing chunk of time, a monument of silence built around a single, unbroken stretch of gravel, known only to me as the Sentinel Track. I am sitting now, as I am every morning and every evening, on the scrutiny post, the old, sun-bleached rocking chair on the porch of the Vance homestead. The wood creaks, a familiar, mournful rhythm beneath me, a sound that has become the only predictable melody in a life otherwise dedicated to the absence of noise. I feel the weight of this decade settled in my spine. It's not just age that has bowed me, but the constant stubborn angle of my neck, forever cocked to watch the point where the road disappears into the horizon. It is 2023. The air is thick and still, smelling of baked earth and the ghost of rain that never falls. Today marks something specific, something terrible, though the exact minute is irrelevant now. The entire day is stained with the knowledge that it is the 10th silent anniversary. A decade. 10 years since my son rode out for a sack of feed and a few tins of preserved goods from Oak Haven Junction, the nearest collection of essential services, small and sparsely populated, yet apparently vast enough to swallow a good man whole. I try to recall the last time I didn't feel this ache, this specific, crushing expectation that sits right behind my sternum. It was before I had to learn how to live with the silence of the empty tack room, before I had to accept the useless reality of Caleb's worn bridle, which hangs now on a rusty porch nail, mocking me with its preparedness, and is clean conditioned, ready for a journey that ended before it began. I remember that morning vividly, despite the intervening ocean of time. The sun was rising much the same as it does today, but the light was full of promise, not just the harsh glare of regret. My boy, Caleb Vance, 30, age at disappearance, 20, had been laughing about something trivial, the stubborn refusal of the coffee to perk, maybe. He was lean, rugged, built for this harsh land, with dark hair that always needed cutting and strong, capable hands that defined his practical nature. 20 years old, reliable, quiet, entirely too good for the solitude I dragged him into. Just need the salt block and some lamp oil, Pa had said, swinging himself easily onto the saddle. I'll be back before the shadows get long. I watched him go. I remember waving a hand, too preoccupied with mending a broken fence post to spare a full moment. That oversight, that small economy of attention, has become the barbed wire wrapped around my soul. I was 62 then, still believing I controlled the movement of the sun and the flow of time. I believed in the natural order of things. A sun goes to town, a sun comes home. The laws of physics seemed less certain than that simple truth. I watched him until he became just a shimmer of dust against the heat haze at the end of the sentinel track. And then, nothing. The silence began not with a roar, but with a slow, creeping erosion of sound. The first days were fueled by irritation. The horse must have thrown a shoe. He must have been delayed by weather, or maybe had to help a farmer along the road. The irritation morphed into worry by the end of the first week, and that worry sharpened into a cold, diamond-hard fear by the end of the second. I rode out then. I traveled the 10 miles of the sentinel track myself, my old bones protesting every jostle, my lungs inhaling the dust that had swallowed my child. I reached Oak Haven Junction. It was the most desolate place on earth. A few clapboard buildings and a general store run by a woman whose face was as dry and cracked as the riverbed in summer. A young man, dark hair, strong hands, rode a chestnut mare. I asked, my voice thin and unfamiliar. She thought for a long time, her eyes drifting over me as if trying to place me in a landscape she'd forgotten. 10 years ago, you say? Might have been a dozen young men through here in that time, Vance. They all look the same when they're just passing through. Passing through. The phrase implies onward movement, a destination beyond. But Caleb didn't pass through. He was meant to turn round and return to the Vance homestead. He was meant to come home. I spent 3 days in Oak Haven Junction, a lifetime condensed into 72 hours of fruitless searching, asking questions that melted like ice in the desert sun. Nobody remembered. Nobody cared. The world outside my little dusty square was a blur of constant motion, utterly indifferent to the gaping void left by one missing 20-year-old. When I returned to the homestead, beaten and empty, the bridle was hanging exactly where ID left it. That was when the long decade began. My life is no longer about the seasons or the crops, those withered long ago, dying of neglect and solitude. My life is the repetition of the daily vigil. I stand up from the scrutiny post now, the wood groaning in protest. Every joint in my body registers the complaint, the knees stiff from rising, the hips locked by disuse, the spine screaming from its permanent curvature. It feels like the specific agony of waiting has permeated my very marrow. I walk 3 steps to the edge of the porch, and I look. The sentinel track is a long brown ribbon of dust stretching west. It's not just a road. It is the physical manifestation of my grief, a silent, unrelenting monument to a life interrupted. I scrutinize every ripple in the heat, every shifting shadow, trying to conjure the sight of him. I search for the smallest disturbance, a cloud of dust that shouldn't be there, a faint echo of hooves against the packed earth. 10 years. I've watched that road become imprinted on my retinas. Sometimes, late at night, when I close my eyes, I don't see darkness. I see that dusty, empty line. The isolation here is a beast that feeds on silence. Before Caleb left, there was another silence, an older, softer one that preceded this brutal emptiness. My wife, Doris Hawthorne, deceased, passed quietly in her sleep 5 years before Caleb's departure. She was the emotional anchor, the one whose gentle demeanor softened the harsh edges of this wilderness. Her memory, captured in a faded photograph kept on the mantelpiece, is the only other witness to this long, slow decay. You should have left this place, Elias, her ghostly voice sometimes whispers in the night wind. It's too much empty space for one heart, but I couldn't leave. Leaving meant admitting defeat, meant conceding that the last physical tie to my past, the sight of Caleb returning, was severed, and I will not admit it. I walk back inside the house. The interior of the Vance homestead is a museum of arrested time. Dust motes dance in the slivers of sunlight cutting through the grimy windows. On the kitchen wall hangs the family calendar. It hasn't been used for appointments since 2013. I ripped off the monthly pages year after year, until only the stark, brittle card of the current year remained, marked only by the passing of year's 10 neat, brutal hash marks etched into the corner. Today, I use a trembling finger to mark the final line next to the number 10. The calendar doesn't show appointments or birthdays, it only chronicles loss. I touch the faded photograph of Doris. Her eyes are kind, but they seem to carry a distant sorrow. Perhaps knowing even then the kind of waiting that lay ahead for me. "Doris," I whisper, my voice cracking from disuse. I never should have let him go alone. I sit down at the rough-hewn table, the same table where we celebrated Caleb's 10th birthday, then his 18th, then his 20th. The house feels cold, even under the hammering sun. My body is wearing out from the act of waiting, not just from the natural attrition of age. Every joint aches with the specific, agonizing weight of expectation. It feels like the current of time has flowed around me, leaving me marooned here, while the rest of the world rushes onward, forgetting that a man can vanish without a trace. People far away, in the bustle of cities I haven't seen since the 1970s, might tell me I'm foolish. They might offer logical explanations, bandits, a sudden illness, a decision to simply start a new life somewhere else. But those people don't understand the raw, stubborn refusal of a father's love. They don't understand that here, where the land is empty and the sky is silent, belief is the only resource left. I realize I haven't eaten much today, or yesterday. The routines of life, eating, cleaning, sleeping, are secondary to the vigil. I rise again, deciding I need to walk the road. Not just look at it, but walk upon it, feel the grit beneath my boots. Today, the anniversary, demands action, even if that action is purely symbolic, purely for the sake of exhausting the grief in my muscles. I step out into the blinding afternoon sun. The heat is oppressive, radiating off the dust like a physical weight. I start walking, slowly at first, then with a grim, determined shuffle, down the porch steps and onto the sentinel track. My objective is to reach the rise, about a mile out, where the road finally dips and disappears. That point is the last visual memory I have of Caleb. The journey is a torment. Every step is a physical argument with the earth. I look down, not just watching my feet, but searching the ground. 10 years of weather, wind, and occasional animal traffic, but my mind is convinced it can find something, a lost coin, a distinct horseshoe print from Caleb's chestnut mare, something that proves the end wasn't here, but somewhere further on. I stop. I lean against an old, weathered fence post, my lungs burning. The silence is deafening. It's a physical pressure against my eardrums. I close my eyes for a moment, trying to find the 20-year-old Elias, the one who worked the land without the constant distraction of grief. He's gone. I open my eyes, refocusing on the task. I walk another few hundred yards. The dust here is finer, older. I drag my boot across it. And then I see something. A small, unnatural glint of metal, half buried in the sun-baked soil. My heart seizes. It's not just a skipped beat. It's a full, terrifying lurch that sends a wave of dizziness through me. I drop to my knees, ignoring the pain in my joints, ignoring the dust coating my face. My hands, trembling uncontrollably, scrape away the dirt. It's small. It's circular, It's brass. It's a button. A simple workaday brass button, the kind used on a good denim jacket. Caleb wore a denim jacket that day, a heavy dark blue one, even though it was already getting warm. He always worried about the nights getting cold on the trail. This is the climax. This tiny, inanimate object, found after a decade of barren searching, tears a hole straight through my carefully constructed stoicism. I hold the button in my palm. It's warm from the sun, but it feels like ice against my skin. It could be anything. A button dropped a century ago by a traveling salesman. A random piece of junk carried by the wind. But my mind rejects those logical possibilities. For 10 years I have searched for a whisper, a confirmation, an absolute something that proves he wasn't simply erased. And here it is, a small, cold fragment of the boy who left. I stare at it, tears blurring my vision. These aren't the dry, internal tears of constant sorrow. These are hot, ragged streams, carving tracks through the dust on my cheeks. Caleb, I choke out, the name a painful rasp. You came this far. The implication is devastating. If he dropped the button this close to home, within the first mile of his journey, what happened? Did he stop? Did he struggle? Did he realize he forgot something and turn back, only to meet misfortune just outside the perimeter of my sight? The silence around me seems to lean in, amplifying the pounding of my blood in my ears. The road, which had been a symbol of endless hope, now becomes a crime scene, a place of terrible, final uncertainty. I clutch the button so tightly, my knuckles turn white. The pressure of holding on to this single piece of evidence is intolerable. It doesn't offer comfort. It only offers proximity to the moment of loss. It's too much to process, too raw after so long. I drop the button. No, I don't drop it. I fling it, wildly, violently, into the sparse scrub brush lining the road. Damn you! I roar, the sound foreign and ragged in the stillness. I scream at the sky, at the sun, at the indifferent dust that swallows everything whole. Damn you for telling me he was close. Damn you for not bringing him back. The physical pain of kneeling, the emotional shock, the decade of exhaustion, it all collapses on me. I fall forward onto the scorching earth, my face pressed into the dust that once carried the scent of my son's mare. I weep, truly weep, for the first time since Doris died. I am not the stoic, hardened man of the vigil. I am just an old man, Elias Vance, wasting away on an impossible dream. A ghost in this forgotten corner of the West. The intensity passes as quickly as it came, leaving me drained and weak, tasting dirt and salt. I lay there for a long time, listening to the vast, empty breathing of the plain. After what feels like hours, I push myself up. My body protests with renewed vigor, but the emotional storm has passed, leaving a strange, quiet clarity in its wake. I know what I did. I threw away the only tangible connection I had found. I crawl on my hands and knees back toward where I flung the button. I scratch through the thorny undergrowth, my old hands pricked and bleeding. I search blindly, methodically, not because the button itself matters, but because the search is all I have left. I cannot leave the truth, however painful, abandoned in the dirt. Finally, I find it. Small, dull brass, nestled next to a dried cactus root. I pick it up gently this time, cleaning it off with a shaking thumb. It is a piece of my son, and I will not throw him away again. I put the button securely into the breast pocket of my faded work shirt. It lies against my heart, a constant, dull pressure that is somehow preferable to the hollow emptiness of absolute unknowing. I turn round and look back toward the Vance homestead. It looks impossibly small, a tired relic against the harsh, infinite sun. I realize that I am not just waiting for Caleb. I am defending his memory against the total erasure of the wilderness. I am the boundary stone. The return walk is slower, more deliberate. The heat of the day begins to fade, and the shadows stretch long, turning the world the color of deep regret. The daily cycle is asserting itself, demanding the return of the daily vigil. I reach the porch, pull myself up the steps, and sink back into the scrutiny post. The sun is nearing the horizon now. It stains the sky in violent shades of orange and purple, making the dust of the sentinel track glow a deep, mournful red. I look at the road again, but the frantic, hopeful urgency has been replaced by something quieter, heavier. The certainty that Caleb is coming home, once a roaring fire, is now a smoldering ember. But an ember is still fire. I reach into my pocket and feel the brass button. It's cold now, heavy. I know the odds are stacked against me. I know that reality offers no comfort, that logic demands I mourn and move on. But logic and reality are luxuries for those who haven't lost everything to the silence of the West. I settle deeper into the rocking chair. I won't stop waiting until I can't look anymore. And as long as I draw a single ragged breath, my heart refuses to accept the finality of silence. I look at the end of that road, where the red light is fading into blackness, and I still conjure the sight of him. Not today, maybe not tomorrow, but one day. I close my eyes, and for a moment I hear the distinct, quick clop of a chestnut mare against the packed earth, coming home. The sound lasts only a second, a trick of the exhausted mind, but it is enough. It is enough to draw the next breath. It is enough to face the 10th long night of the long silent decade. The dark settles over the Vance homestead, and I remain there, a solitary sentinel, waiting for the sunrise that will bring the 11th year. I am still here, still watching, still loving. And the road remains empty. The heat of the day finally concedes to the twilight, pulling long, bruised shadows across the porch of the homestead. I feel the dull, brass pressure of the button against my chest, a small, cold weight that has irrevocably altered the landscape of my grief. It is not just an object. It is a time stamp, a physical marker that says, the road stopped here. I sink deeper into the dry, yielding wood of the scrutin post. The rocking motion is automatic now. Less a mechanical comfort and more a function of breathing, a shallow, weary rhythm that defines the 10th year of the long decade. Tonight, the chair doesn't just squeak. It moans, a long, low sound, like a tired animal settling for the night. The sun has disappeared entirely, taking with it the illusion of clarity. Now, under the star-poked, vast canvas of the western night sky, everything reverts to ambiguity. The sentinel track, which only hours ago seemed to promise a definitive answer in the dust, now dissolves into featureless darkness. It is an emptiness without contour, demanding only silence and perpetual patience. I close my fingers around the button inside my shirt pocket. Before today, the wait was defined by pure, theoretical hope, the possibility that Caleb had simply been detained by the world, somewhere far away, and would eventually find the path back. That hope was clean, if painful. This button, however, taints it. If he lost it within the first mile, he was still close. He was still here when the interruption occurred. This realization is the true, crushing burden of the 10th silent anniversary. It shifts the location of the tragedy from the distant, unimaginable scope of the world to the immediate, agonizing perimeter of my own neglect. I let him ride out, believing the distance protected him, yet he was vulnerable mere minutes after leaving the sound of my hammer on the fence post. My eyes are open, fixed on the black line where the road should be. The deep-set blue of my eyes, faded by 72 years of sun and 40 of raising a ranch, now sees only the internal flicker of memory, brighter and more terrifying than the stars above. I remember Caleb when he was 12 trying to lift a heavy hay bale too big for him. He wouldn't ask for help. He just tried repeatedly, his lean body shaking with the effort until he finally shifted it an inch, and then another. He had that stubborn, quiet pride that I had always admired, the same quality that prevents me from moving on now. He was reliable, yes, but fundamentally he was dependable to a fault. He would not have simply abandoned the mare, the supplies, or me. His departure was not a choice, it was a cessation. Doris always worried about that quality in him. She knew that practicality could be a double-edged sword out here. I shift my weight, and the scrutiny post protests again. I visualize Doris, her gentle demeanor a soft focus in the harsh memory of the ranch. She was the one who insisted on planting the small, resilient rose bushes near the water tank, their only splashes of color in this gray landscape. They died 2 years after she did, starved of her attention and care, much like the fields died after Caleb left. I think about the last time I heard laughter that wasn't strained or temporary. It was the summer before he turned 20. We had managed a surprisingly good yield of oats, enough to warrant a small, celebratory purchase, a new, high-quality saddle for the mare. "She deserves it, Pa," Caleb had said, his face alight with a rare, open grin. He loved that horse, a chestnut mare with a white star on her forehead. The mare didn't come back either. That is another layer of the grief, the animal silence. When Caleb left, the ranch was alive with the sound of work, the lowing of the few remaining cattle, the grinding of the grain mill, the rhythmic hammering of repairs. Now the Vance homestead is a tomb of sound. The wind, when it comes, whistles through broken window panes like a lament. The silence is not peaceful. It is hungry, feeding on every memory until only the bare bones of waiting remain. I push myself out of the chair, the movement requiring a concerted effort of will, not just muscle. I need to walk inside, away from the terrifying openness of the Sentinel track, but I can't stop looking back. The road is the physical manifestation of my grief, but the darkness is the manifestation of my fear. I step inside the dilapidated ranch house. The darkness is thick here too, smelling of dust and dried sage and the faint, permanent odor of unburned lamp oil. Caleb was supposed to bring back lamp oil. I light a single kerosene lantern. The yellow light throws long, distorted shadows onto the rough-hewn walls. The house is a museum of arrested time. I avoid the kitchen, the room that houses the family calendar for now. Its presence is too abrasive, too insistent on marking the passage of useless years. Instead, I move into the main room, to the mantelpiece where the faded photograph of Doris rests. I pick it up. Her eyes are kind, but they seem to carry a distant sorrow, a premonition of the waiting that lay ahead. "Doris," I whisper, my voice catching on the dry air. "I've found something small, right out there." I pull the brass button out and lay it in the palm of my hand. In the lamplight, it gleams faintly. It's a sturdy, simple piece of hardware, designed to last. He didn't make it far, love. He was stopped here, near where the roses used to be. The weight of her memory often feels heavier than Caleb's absence. While his vanishing is an open wound, her death is a scar, deep and immutable. She was the emotional anchor, the one who softened the edges of my stubborn nature. Without her I became brittle, easily shattered by the smallest vibration of reality. I put the button down next to her photo. It feels like placing a piece of evidence at the altar of my lost life. I begin to walk through the house, slowly, using the ritual movement as a distraction from the thought of the button. This is my inventory of loss, a nightly routine far more painful than the daily vigil itself. The tacker room. Caleb's worn bridle hangs on the rusty nail outside, but the tacker room holds the smell of conditioned leather and horse eggs, or at least it used to. Now it holds the bitter scent of old dry wood. The saddle pegs are empty. The tools are neatly hung, gathering the fine powder of the desert. I run a calloused finger over a polished hammer. Caleb was methodical. Everything had its place. I haven't moved his tools. They are preserved in the exact arrangement he left them in, a frozen tableau of competence. I remember watching him sharpen the axe one evening, the rhythmic shink of the stone against the steel. It was the sound of purpose, of future work. Now, the silence is so profound that if I were to drop this hammer, the sound would reverberate through the entire structure, shattering the decade-long quiet. I don't drop it. I can't break the illusion of permanence he left behind. I move into the kitchen. The family calendar hangs starkly against the wall. I look at the hash marks I etched earlier today, 10 long, brutal lines representing the years since 2013. The calendar doesn't track appointments or celebrations. It only chronicles loss, a merciless ledger of time spent waiting. I pick up a worn pencil, ready to draw the small, thin line that represents the start of the 11th year, but my hand stops. The absurdity of the repetition hits me with the force of a physical blow. What am I waiting for? A decade has passed, defined entirely by the not happening of his return. The button proves the event took place nearby. The logic of the world, the logic I tried to suppress for 10 years with the sheer force of my love, finally floods in. People far away, those who rush onward in the current of time, told me a man doesn't vanish without a trace. But they were wrong. He vanished, and now I have the trace, and the trace changes nothing about the outcome. I sit down at the table. The grain of the wood is familiar under my fingers. It feels cold. I remember Caleb carving his initials into this table when he was 8. CV. They are faint now, sanded smooth by decades of scrubbing, but I know exactly where they are. I trace them with my finger. This realization that the waiting has ended, not with a sight of him, but with the confirmation of a local demise, is the true climax of this long, slow decay. The high-intensity fear of the button's discovery on the road was merely the prelude. This, now, is the internal collapse. I am an old man, well past 70, and my entire existence has been tethered to a road that only leads one way, away. The current of time has flowed around me, leaving me marooned here, a pillar of salt in the wilderness, forever looking backward. But if he is not coming back, what remains of Elias? The old man who believed in the simple truth, a son goes to town, a son comes home, died 10 years ago. All that remains is the sentinel, the ghost guarding an empty plot of land. I stand up, taking the kerosene lamp with me. I must break the vigil, not the memory, but the relentless physical expectation. I can no longer sit on that chair and pretend that the next dust cloud will bring him home before the shadows get long. The shadows got long a decade ago. I walk out onto the porch again. The night is colder now, the air dry and sharp. The scrutiny post sits empty, rocking slightly in a stray breeze. I look at it, this piece of furniture that has absorbed 10 years of my life and pain. It has become a monument of stubbornness, but also to futility. I walk past the chair, down the steps. My joints protest, stiff from rising, but the pain is secondary to the grim clarity that has settled upon me. I walk toward the east, toward the rising sun, deliberately turning my back on the sentinel track for the first time in 10 years during the night watch. I walk to the edge of the porch, and then I perform the one act I have avoided for a decade. I unhook Caleb's worn bridle from the rusty nail. It is supple, well-oiled, perfectly ready for a journey that will never begin. I hold it in my hands. It smells faintly of horse sweat and leather preservative, a smell of work and life. It is the last remnant of the incomplete journey. I clutch the bridle tightly. This object represented the potential for his return. Hanging there, it was a guarantee that the moment he appeared, we would be ready to welcome him home and prepare the mare for rest. Now it is just a piece of equipment, useless and heartbreaking. I could burn it, I could bury it, I could let the elements strip it down to raw fibers. Instead, I walk back inside. I return to the kitchen. I take the bridle, and with shaking hands, I layer it across the surface of the rough-hewn table, covering the faint carving of CV. This is the ritual of finality. It is not abandonment. It is acceptance. The saddle is gone, the mare is gone, Caleb is gone. The bridle no longer represents a trip out or a trip back. It is now a shroud, a memorial on the table of the Vance homestead. I pick up the pencil again. I do not draw a line for the 11th year. Instead, I carefully, deliberately, take the calendar off the nail and carry it into the main room. I find the small cast-iron stove we use in the deepest winter. It is empty now. I stand there, looking at the brittle cardstock marked with the decade of my despair. I think of the thousands of times I looked at this calendar, reminding myself that another day had passed, another day that Caleb was still gone. I tear the card, not violently, but slowly, meticulously, into small, manageable pieces. The paper makes a dry, whispering sound, the last gasp of the long decade. I place the scraps inside the cold stove. I then take the faded photograph of Doris and hold it close. Her eyes offer no judgment, only sorrow. I can't wait there anymore, Doris. I tell her memory. It's time to remember him here. I find a small, unused leather pouch, the kind we use for holding small change or extra ammunition. I take the brass button from the mantelpiece, kiss its cold surface, and place it inside the pouch. I tied the drawstring tight and put the pouch in the deepest, most secure drawer of my chest. Alongside my father's old pocket watch, items that mark the irreversible march of time. The active waiting, the daily vigil, ends tonight. The hope that fueled the constant scrutiny has run dry, replaced by the deep, profound certainty of loss. I am not abandoning Caleb. I am simply moving the monument from the road into my heart. I return to the porch one last time. The sentinel track is invisible in the profound night. It is just the earth, indifferent and silent. I look west, where the road disappears, and I speak the words I have refused to utter for 10 years. Rest now, son. I saw your trace. I know you didn't forget me. The air carries only the vast emptiness of the plains. No echo, no whisper, no clip-clop of a chestnut marae. just the silence he left behind. I turned my back completely on the west, on Oak Haven Junction, on the decade of relentless expectation. I walk back inside the homestead. I am still Elias. I am still here. I will still love him until I draw my last breath, but the vigil is over. I am no longer a man wasting away on an impossible dream. I am a father guarding a profound, terrible truth. I blow out the kerosene lamp. The Vance homestead is plunged into absolute blackness. I feel my way to the bedroom, guided by memory and the contours of a house I built with my own hands. I lie down on the narrow, sagging bed. As long as I draw a single ragged breath, my heart refuses to accept the finality of silence. But now, that refusal is a quiet commitment to memory, not a desperate plea to the empty road. The dark settles over the Vance homestead. The long night of the long, silent decade has finally given way to the first dark night of my acceptance. I close my eyes. I don't see the dusty, empty line of the Sentinel track anymore. I see Caleb's face, laughing about the stubborn coffee pot, full of the promise that belonged to a day 10 years and a lifetime ago. I sleep. Not the fitful, anxious rest of the Sentinel, but the deep, exhausted sleep of a man who has finally allowed himself to mourn. The road remains outside, silent and unbroken, but for me, the watching is finally done. The 11th year starts in the morning, and it will be a year of quiet remembrance, not frantic expectation. The waiting is over. Caleb Vance is home, in the silence of my heart. I sleep. Not the fitful, anxious rest of the Sentinel, but the deep, exhausted sleep of a man who has finally allowed himself to mourn. The road remains outside, silent and unbroken. But for me, the watching is finally done. The 11th year starts in the morning, and it will be a year of quiet remembrance, not frantic expectation. Caleb is home, in the silence of my heart. The first rays of the dawn, thin and relentless, found the cracks in the window panes of the Vance homestead. They did not wake me with the violent insistence of a decade's alarm clock, the internal terror that demanded I immediately rush to the porch to ensure I had not missed a returning shadow. Instead, the light merely illuminated the dust motes dancing lazily in the air, transforming them into glittering transient constellations within the confines of my small, cramped bedroom. I opened my eyes, and for the first time in 10 years, the very first thought that entered my mind was not, "Is he coming today?" It was simply, Doris would have appreciated this quiet. A profound, bone-deep stillness replaced the frantic, internal ticking that had governed my life. The absence of hope was not painful. It was merely heavy, a settled weight that anchored me to the present moment, rather than casting me perpetually forward toward an imagined future. I stretched, a slow, aching process that articulated every joint in my 72-year-old body. The age felt real now, acknowledged, no longer suspended by the desperate energy of the weight. I was not a sentinel, I was just an old man rising. I rose from the sagging mattress. The air inside the dilapidated ranch house was stale, tasting of cold ashes and dry wood, but even that familiarity was a comfort. I walked toward the kitchen, my movements deliberate, no longer rushed by the phantom necessity of the vigil. The light was stronger here. My eyes immediately went to the wall where the family calendar had hung for so long. The wall was bare now, a pale square, marking the outline where the paper had resisted the sun and the dust. It looked like a fresh wound, a blank canvas where history should have been etched. I looked at the table. Caleb's worn bridle lay there, draped over the faint CV carving, a smooth, dark ribbon of leather against the rough-hewn wood. It was impossibly quiet. 10 years of constant, focused listening had trained my ears to isolate every sound, the distant howl of the wind, the cry of a hawk, the subtle shift of gravel on the sentinel track. Now, the quiet wasn't a mask for something missed. It was simply the truth of the desert. I approached the table and ran my hand across the bridle. The leather, expertly conditioned by Caleb before his departure, was still supple. He was meticulous about his gear. I remember standing here, watching him apply the leather dressing, the sweet, musky smell filling the small kitchen. "If you take care of the tools, Pa," he had said, not looking up, "they'll take care of you." It was a maxim of the isolated life, taught to him by me and perfected by him. He took care of the ma, he took care of the bridle, he took care of the ranch. He was reliable. That reliability was why the disappearance had been so impossible to reconcile. He wouldn't have simply abandoned his duty. The button, now secured in the leather pouch, deep in my chest of drawers, was the agonizing confirmation that fate had intervened near the home perimeter, interrupting that reliable return. I stood there for a long time, the bridle under my palm. I saw the leather creased exactly where the bit would sit, where the reins connected. I recalled the sound of the ma snorting impatiently, ready for the trip to Oak Haven Junction. The image was painfully clear, the chestnut mare's white star, Caleb adjusting his worn leather gloves, his lean young silhouette against the fierce morning sun. He was 20, invincible in that moment, merely going to fetch lamp oil and seed. I moved the bridle gently to the side of the table, covering only half the carving. I look at the CV initials, carved over 4 decades ago. I remember catching him doing it. He was 8, caught red-handed with my old pocket knife. "You've ruined the table, son," he scolded, trying to sound stern. Doris had intervened, placing a soft hand on my arm. "It's his mark, Elias. Let him have his mark." And now, this fragile, faint mark of existence was the only immutable fact of his life within this house. Everything else was memory, fading in the relentless sun of time. The table, however, held him forever, regardless of the miles I couldn't monitor. I decide on a task, a small, defining action that separates this morning from the previous 3,652. I need to clean the tack room. The tack room was never truly dirty. Caleb had seen to that. But it was silent, frozen in 2013. I grab a stiff brush and a bucket of water drawn from the well. The water is cool, metallic, familiar. Entering the tack room is like entering a sanctuary. The scent of dry wood and old saddle soot is faint. The light is dim, filtered through the single dusty window. I look at the empty saddle pegs, the ghosts of the mare's riding gear. The bridle is now in the kitchen. I look at the remaining ropes and spare cinches, all meticulously hung. I begin to scrub the floor, disturbing a thick layer of fine, red dust that has settled over everything. As I work, the rhythmic rasp of the brush on the old planks creates a sound of industry, sound that has been absent for too long. It is not the sound of waiting, it is the sound of maintenance. I pause, leaning back on my 72-year-old haunches, breathing hard. The physical work is cleansing. It forces the mind to focus on the immediate, tangible reality, the dirt, the water, the wood grain. My gaze drifts to the shelf where Caleb kept his small, treasured possessions, a half-empty tin of chewing tobacco he saved for special occasions, a small whetstone, a book of poetry that Doris had given him when he was a teenager, Robert Frost. If I remember rightly, poems about roads less traveled. I pull the book down. The pages are yellowed, dry, brittle. I open it randomly. I trace the words with a dusty finger. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep. I close the book slowly. He did have promises to keep. He promised he'd be back by nightfall with the lamp oil. That promise was the anchor that had tethered my soul to the sentinel track for a decade. He wasn't a man who broke promises. I replaced the book. This is the difference between this morning and all those before. I am no longer looking for an explanation for the broken promise. I am simply accepting the breakage itself. The world is a place where good, reliable men vanish, not because they choose to, but because the road intervenes. I finish scrubbing the floor, leaving a streak of damp, dark wood that quickly begins to lighten as the desert air sucks the moisture away. The tack room is clean. It still smells of memory, but it no longer smells of interruption. It is a finished space now, ready to be preserved. I walk out onto the porch. The scrutiny post sits there, sun-bleached and empty. It looks pathetic now, a relic of a failed mission. The sun is high, a brutal white eye watching the plains. I walk down the steps, my spine less bowed today, perhaps because I am no longer trying to look over the next ridgeline. I look at the sentinel track. It stretches out, a desolate line of grey gravel and red dust, disappearing into the heat haze towards Oak Haven Junction. It is exactly as it has always been, empty. But today, I see it differently. It is not the physical manifestation of my grief. It is merely a road, a path, an indifferent, unyielding, demanding only that it be traveled. For 10 years I had personified it, giving it agency, believing it held the secret to Caleb's return. It holds nothing. It is merely dirt and stone. This is the true, crushing burden of acceptance, the realization that the universe is vast, uncaring, and entirely silent regarding human suffering. The road did not take him, chance did. I walked slowly, deliberately, toward where the small rose bushes used to struggle near the water tank, the spot where I found the brass button. The ground is dry, cracked clay, but I can still locate the slight depression where Doris had planted them, insisting on bringing a little bit of softness to the harsh west. I stop exactly where the button was. I stand there, staring down at the cracked earth. I imagine the momentary struggle, the small violence, the quick cessation of sound and movement that must have occurred here 10 years ago. It didn't take place in some far-off, distant landscape. It happened here, right on the perimeter of my existence. A feeling of intense, sickening remorse washes over me. Why didn't I hear anything? Why didn't the ma whinny? I was hammering fence posts that morning, barely 50 yards from this spot. The wind must have been blowing the wrong way. The noise of my labor must have drowned out the brief, final sounds of Caleb's departure. The silence was not external. It was my own deaf stubbornness. This internal collapse is the true climax of the long decade. It is not the finding of the button, but the realization of the proximity. It means I failed him not only in the waiting, but in the final moments of his life. I was here. I was close enough to help, but I was focused on the next post, the next task, relying on his reliable return. I sink to my knees, heedless of the dust coating my trousers. I clutch the dry earth. The sun beats down, relentlessly hot. The anguish I feel now is raw, physical, immediate, unfiltered by the protective membrane of hope. "I was right here, son," I whisper into the dirt, the words dry and brittle. "I was supposed to watch over you." I watched the road, but I didn't watch the distance from the porch to the first rise. Tears, hot and unexpected, cut channels through the dust on my sun-scorched face. I haven't cried like this since Doris died. These tears are different. They are not tears of sadness, but tears of accountability. I had convinced myself that if I just waited long enough, the world would deliver him back. But the world had already finished its transaction right here. I stay knelt in the sun, letting the grief burn away the remaining stubbornness. This is the purification. I feel the years of tension draining from my shoulders, replaced by an immense, terrible tenderness for the boy who left and never got past his mother's old rose bushes. When the sun becomes too fierce, I slowly rise. My legs are stiff, protesting the sudden, uncharacteristic display of weakness. I look back toward the house. The Vance homestead is a silhouette of stoicism against the sky. I walk back toward the porch. I do not sit in the scrutiny post. I walk past it, up the steps, and stand in the shade, looking back at the empty chair. The scrutiny post must go. It is an artifact of the failed mission. It must be retired, not destroyed, but given a final resting place. I approach the chair. The dry wood is rough under my hand. I remember building it with Caleb years ago, a project we undertook during a slow winter. We used scrap wood, but we sanded it smooth, paying attention to the balance of the rockers. "It'll last forever, Pa," Caleb had said, testing the rhythm. "Only if you keep sitting in it, son." The bitter irony of that statement now settles like dust in my throat. I lift the chair. It is surprisingly light, hollowed out by time and sun. I carry it, not to the burn pile, but around to the back of the house, where the old, disused storage shed stands, a place where broken or retired ranch equipment goes to rest in dignity. I slide the scrutiny post into the shed, positioning it carefully against the back wall. It is now out of sight of the sentinel track, away from the demanding western horizon. It is no longer an instrument of anticipation. It is a piece of furniture that served its purpose and is now at peace. With the chair gone, the porch feels vast, empty, and strangely vulnerable. It is just wood planks and air now, not a command center. I go back inside. The air is cooler here. I retrieve the kerosene lamp from the mantel. It is the same kind Caleb was supposed to buy oil for. It is symbolic, heavy, in my hands. I decide it must be filled, regardless of whether I need it. The supplies must be maintained, even if they are no longer for Caleb's return. I find the old, heavy metal tin of kerosene we kept in the storage locker. The oil is still good, slightly dusty. I carefully pour the clean golden liquid into the lamp reservoir. The smell is sharp, chemical, assuring. It is the scent of preparedness. As I work, I think of Doris. She was the one who taught me that grief must have boundaries. When her roses died, she wept for a day, and then she collected the dried petals, put them in a small jar, and placed them next to her wedding ring. She turned loss into memorial. I had forgotten that lesson in the decade of my stubborn vigil. I finished filling the lamp and lighting the wick. The yellow light, warm and soft, flickered into existence, even in the middle of the bright day. It wasn't for navigation or reading, it was for warmth. It was a conscious act of filling the emptiness. I moved to the chest of drawers, where I placed the leather pouch. I pull it out. The button is still inside, a cold, smooth weight. I hold the pouch in my hand. This is my new pocket watch, marking not the time, but the location of the interruption. I sit down at the kitchen table again. The bridle is there. The empty wall is there. The light is shining. I realize that what I need now is not an answer, but a narrative. I spent 10 years defining his story as the boy who disappeared. I must redefine it as the boy who lived until he couldn't return. I traced the lines of the bridle again. This was his last object used. It felt like a handshake, a final communication from a man who was always quiet with words. I stand up and walk back into the main room, to the fireplace mantel where Doris's photograph rests. I place the filled, lit kerosene lamp next to her photo. "I's not waiting anymore, Doris," I say to the gentle face in the frame. "I's home." I pick up the pouch with the button. I find a heavy old Bible on the shelf, the one used for the family record. I open it to the back leaf, where the births and deaths are recorded. My hand shakes slightly, but my resolve is firm. I find the entry for Caleb Vance, born 20 years before the disappearance. I take the pencil, the one I had refused to use to mark the 11th year on the calendar. Under his birth entry, I write, "Lost to the road, near the homestead, 2013. I do not write died, I write lost. The distinction is important. Death implies a final knowledge. Being lost implies a continuing, if quiet, search in the landscape of memory." I place the small leather pouch containing the button inside the pages of the Bible, resting it directly on his entry. The book is closed, sealed by the small, cold weight of the brass. The memory is now protected, bound, and placed on the hearthstone of the family history. The act is definitive. The inventory of loss is complete. The objects are transformed from placeholders to memorials. I walk outside again. It is mid-afternoon now. The sun is at its zenith, casting sharp, uncompromising shadows. The heat feels less oppressive now that I am not fighting against the clock or the empty horizon. I look at the sentinel track one last time. There are no shadows to conjure, no illusions left to cling to. It is merely dust and distance. I had tethered my love to that distance, believing the farther away he was, the safer the hope. But love shouldn't be tethered to distance. It should be anchored to the heart. I walk back toward the well. I draw a fresh bucket of water, the rusty chain grinding a loud, familiar protest. I drink deeply, the cold water stinging my throat. It tastes of earth and survival. I have spent a decade living in suspended animation. Now, the current of time, which flowed around me, suddenly feels like it is moving through me again. I am old, tired, and deeply wounded, but I am no longer frozen. I decide that the work of the ranch must resume, not with the frenzied, hopeful energy of preparing for a returning son, but with the quiet, sustained effort of a man who still has days to fill. I look toward the small, neglected garden plot where Doris used to grow herbs. It is a choked mess of weeds and dry soil. I walk to the shed where I put the scrutiny post. I retrieve the hoe and the rusty old cultivator. The work will be slow, painful, and probably unproductive in this heat, but it will be forward motion. I walk to the garden plot, turn my back completely on the sentinel track, and sink the hoe into the dry, hard ground. The blade scrapes against a buried stone with a dull, grating sound, the sound of labor beginning again. The sun starts its long, inevitable descent toward the west. For 10 years this descent was a moment of profound stress, the failure of the day's vigil. Today, it is merely the approach of twilight. I work until the shadows stretch long and cool over the ground, until my back aches with honest, current fatigue, not the phantom weariness of the weight. I look up. The western sky is burning red and gold, turning the world a color of deep regret, but the regret is softened by the act of physical exertion. I stand, wiping sweat and dust from my brow. I look toward Oakhaven Junction, one last time, a final acknowledgement of the path he took. I am still Elias. I am still here. I will still love him until I draw my last breath. But the vigil is over. I am no longer a ghost guarding an empty plot of land. I am a father living a quiet life of profound remembrance. I walk back to the porch. I sit on the steps, the wood cool beneath me. The silence of the homestead is complete. It does not feel hungry. It feels full of the memory of Caleb's laughter, full of the scent of Doris's quiet presence, full of the final, hard-won certainty of loss. The deep-set blue of my eyes, faded by 72 years of sun and 40 of raising a ranch, now sees only the internal flicker of memory, brighter and more comforting than the stars above. I close my eyes. The 11th year has begun. It will not be defined by the hope of return, but by the acceptance of absence. The waiting is over. The grief remains, a permanent, familiar landscape within my heart, but it is no longer consuming the man. I draw a final, ragged breath, and it feels like a continuation, not a cessation. I am here, and Caleb is home, at last. The long, silent decade has ended. Fuel the channel, subscribe, then hit the thumbs up.